welcome everybody to Cambridge, and very much thank you to the organisers for inviting me. It's very kind of them to invite me to do this on a Sunday morning, so it's really good to see you all here. One other thing I should mention about myself, actually, is I'm also a fellow of St Catherine's College. So if any of you are thinking of applying to Cambridge, think about St Catherine's. Check it out. You may think it's not right, it's actually a very lovely college. So if anybody's thinking about applying to Cambridge, please certainly check out St Catherine's College. Right, what I want to talk about today is some of the, unlike the previous presentations, will not be a technical presentation. Okay, so those of you who like your algebra, you're going to be disappointed for the next hour. Okay, there's no algebra in this session. What I'm going to be talking about really are some of the major challenges facing the global economy at the moment. We are in a period of crisis. So we have many challenges, from the Ukraine war to the remnants of COVID, to the protectionism that we're seeing in many countries. So I'm going to talk about the crises, and I'm also going to talk about some of the longer-term trends, sometimes called megatrends, that are challenging the world, challenging us as individuals, challenging economies, and challenging the world economy and society. Now, as mentioned, I'm from the business school, and in the business school we do teach economics, but we teach lots of other things in the business school. So if you want to join the business school and you want to come to Cambridge, you can only do it in your final year, by the way. You can't study business from year one, but you can do something else for 2 or 3 years and then study business. But we do really encourage class participation. Okay, so it's different from lots of the other lectures in Cambridge. Lots of the other lectures in Cambridge, the lecturer will stand up here, they'll talk at you, or she will talk at you for 15 minutes and then they'll leave. In the business school, there's a lot more class participation. So I will ask you some questions as we go along. Feel free to make any observations you wish. This is a university, so we're not expecting a right and wrong answer. Disagreement is the fuel of universities, how we make progress in terms of education. But what I'll be doing, I've got a couple of questions for you today. I'm going to use Mentimeter, so all of you are on your computers. I saw that because I was sat at the back. So you're all on your computers or your phones. So you can go on to mentimeter.com or menti.com and you can put this 8-digit code in. So it's 79711248. So on your phones or on your computer, open a new tab, mentimeter.com. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. No right or wrong answers, and I don't know who you are. This is all anonymous. So it's always great to get the views of individuals, but it's also great to get the views of the class as well. So mentimeter.com, code 79711248. Is that okay? Please do. It's always good to get the participation of everybody. Okay, it's a social responsibility for everybody to engage, so we all share other people's views, understand what they think about the world. So 79711248. There's only a couple of questions today, given the time you've got available, but I would like to know your views. Is that okay? I'm looking at you. Everybody okay? Good. There's a few nods. Thank you very much. That's brilliant. So 79711248. So what I want to do today is to talk about initially some of the crises that are facing the world economy, but then talk about the long-term trends and some of the implications facing the world economy. And there's no right or wrong answers to these trends. We may have different views, but they are trends we have to consider. First of all, anybody know what Collins' English Dictionary Word of the Year was in 2022? Shout out. Anybody know? Well, I'll tell you, there's a bit of mumbling, so I'll tell you what it is. It's permacrisis. Okay? So permacrisis is the word of the year. What does a permacrisis mean? An extended period. Thank you. It's an extended period of instability and insecurity, especially one resulting from a series of catastrophic events. So you will see lots of discussion now about permacrisis. Okay, so we go from one crisis to another. Okay, so we went at the financial crisis, then we've had slow productivity growth after that, we've had a sovereign debt crisis, we've had a euro crisis, we've had COVID-19, we've had the war in Ukraine, and we have a whole series of crises. So one argument is we're having a perma-crisis, but others argue it's not just a perma-crisis, it's a polycrisis. So you will hear others talking about a polycrisis. So you will consider some great, very distinguished academics who go to the World Economic Forum's website talking about, are we in a period of a polycrisis? Now, polycrisis is a bit different. It's the simultaneous occurrence of several catastrophic events. So a perma-crisis, long-term crisis, one after the other. And this is more of a cross-sectional view, a whole interaction of a whole number of crises at the same time. So we are in a period of a crisis, either a perma-crisis or a polycrisis, or perhaps something combined. Now, let's look at some of the risks and crises that have actually been occurring, what people perceive to be the crises. So here I'm looking at some global risks. And I'm going to present you some data. So there's no algebra, there are some data here. It paints some data about what the World Economic Forum thinks on the major crises. Now, not the individual bureaucrats of the World Economic Forum, but they have a survey of political leaders, academic leaders, and business leaders to ask them what they think are the major challenges facing the world economy at the moment. Now, this is the latest global risk report from the World Economic Forum. Now, I should highlight, for those of you at the back, interesting format here. Nobody's at the front. It's just sort of everybody's at the back. So it's interesting. But anyway, for those at the back, which is virtually all of you, the risk categories in blue are economic, in green are environmental, orange geopolitical, red societal, and purple technological. So this is the latest global risk report that came out actually last month in January. So over the next couple of years, the focus is going to be on, let's see if I got a laser here. So cost of living crisis, the natural disasters, geoeconomic confrontation, failure about climate change, and then erosion of social cohesion. Now, that's the short term, and then you've got the medium term over 10 years, that's the right-hand column. You'll see many more of these are green, so they're environmental. So you think that the argument is the problem is the failure to mitigate climate change, failure of climate change adaptation, natural disasters, and the problems of biodiversity loss. So these are all main challenges. So these are what the great and the good consider to be the major risks this year. Now let's just go back a little bit. This is the World Economic Forum's risk report from 2021. Now it did it in a slightly different way in 2021. It did its risks in terms of likelihood, how likely were they to happen, and also in terms of impact. If they did happen, what impact would they have on the world, society, and the economy? Color coding is the same. So you see the top 7 at the top: extreme weather, climate action failure, human environmental damage, infectious diseases, biodiversity loss at the top 5, and then we've got issues about digital security and digital concentration on the right-hand side. So at the top row is 2021, and then the bottom row is 2020. So that was the report published in January 2020, in terms of risks by likelihood. Anything you notice about that line for 2020? The report published in January 2020. Anybody notice what's not there? Yeah, please, if give you a microphone, I'll see if I can do this. Not sure this microphone's working. Hello? Right down there. But I'm just coming over to our colleague over here. 2020, what's somebody notice about 2020? They're all environmental, okay, so is this working? Yeah. Is it all environmental? Okay, what's not there in 2020? Yeah, go, what's there? There's no economic or geopolitical, that's great. What else is not there, bearing in mind what was happening in January 2020? Thank you. There's no COVID there, there's no infectious diseases. So in a report published in January 2020, while the COVID-19 pandemic was actually taking hold in China and beginning to spread elsewhere, nobody identified it. Now, you'd be quite correct to say, actually, the data was collected at the end of 2019. But what the point here is, many people perceive certain risks, and these risks are identifiable, but there's also the unexpected risks. Very few people, if any, saw this risk actually happening. It's the great unknown unknowns, if you go back to that great philosopher Donald Rumsfeld. If you Google him, he's not a great philosopher. But anyway, talk about the unknown unknowns. And the unknowns were here were infectious diseases. No infectious diseases in 2020, or 2019, or 2018. Okay, global risk by likelihood. Not global risk by impact. Yes, infectious diseases was identified in 2021 as number one. But in 2020, when it already started, it wasn't there at all. Okay, so there are risks that we see, but there are also risks that perhaps we don't see. Okay, and so these are, I'm not denying these are important risks, but there may be unexpected risks. If you actually look at the World Economic Forum Global Risks Report, and I'm sort of one of those people who actually reads these sorts of things, rather than just looks at the numbers, you will find it buried away in the text. It says, a recent first-of-its-kind assessment of health security-related capabilities across 195 countries, that's basically the entire world, find fundamental weaknesses around the world. No country is fully prepared to handle an epidemic or pandemic. So we are vulnerable. So identified here in 2020, in the report, they identified this major problem in the text, but when they asked the business leaders, the political leaders, and the academic leaders, they didn't identify a pandemic as a risk, even though it was already starting when the report had been published. So these are risks. So these are important risks, but there may be risks that we don't actually see when we're thinking about our polycrisis or our permacrisis. But also what's important to think about is not just these series of crises, but also what's important to think about is some of the major long-term challenges, and actually the crises often intersect with these challenges. These are sometimes called megatrends, or if you think they're really going to have an adverse effect, megathreats. So an important book by Noor Rabini on megathreats. Noor Rabini is one of the very few people who predicted the financial crisis. You will find lots of economists who say they predicted the financial crisis. Most of them predicted it after it had happened. Okay, even I can do that. Okay, so very few actually predicted it. Noor Rabini predicted it. The new provost of King's College, Cambridge, next October, Gillian Tett, she predicted it, and the governor of the Indian Central Bank predicted it. But very few people predicted the financial crisis. But in this context, we'll think about megatrends and megathreats. And I'm going to identify 6 main global challenges we're going to look at. Are important for us individually, for economies, and for the global society. So, urbanization, in fact we're living in cities, protectionism and deglobalization, arguably the world is going into reverse here, climate change, technology, here I call it the rise of machines, but technology, inequality, and that's many dimensions, income inequality, wealth inequality, gender inequality, racial inequality, and population change, particularly population aging. These are the threats I want to look at, or challenges, in terms of the context of today's presentation. Now, I have to stress here, these are linked to economic growth. Okay, many of these trends are either the inputs into economic growth or the consequences of economic growth. So if we look at our economy, main inputs, people add to economic growth, although on their own they don't add to average prosperity going up, but they add to economic growth. More people adds to economic growth. Technology and innovation adds to economic growth, crucially. Living in cities is both a cause and a consequence of economic growth, the process of urbanization. But in terms of the impact of economic growth, we have people living longer. Now, for somebody my age, this is very, very important, but I'm sure it's important for you. Your average age has increased considerably since the Industrial Revolution. We have increasing inequality. Now, we may accept that as a price we're paying for successful capitalism, or we may say actually it's gone too far. We've got the issue now that perhaps the world is becoming less globalized. This is a headline for The Economist, goodbye globalization. And that's an issue as well. And then, of course, we have issues of climate change. More growth requires more energy is damaging the environment. So what I've identified here is 6 challenges or megathreats. Now, this doesn't have to be an exhaustive list, okay? You can say there are other challenges out there as well. I'm not saying it's a prescriptive list. But these are 6 that are often identified to be very important. Now, how important are these? How important are these 6 challenges? Now, we have different views and different perspectives on whether these are major challenges or whether they are not major challenges. Now, to look at that, what I'm going to do is ask you to vote. Some of you have voted already. So if you haven't voted already, actually, 172 of you voted already. So how important are the global challenges? I'm ranking them from 1 to 5, and these are the ones I'm particularly looking at, I should stress. Population aging, just not population growth, population aging. Living in cities, urbanization. Climate change. Technological change, which I called the rise of machines. Inequality and deglobalization. So let's see what we vote. Right. So you'll see, well, this is the various rankings. So and a few people are still voting. So number 1 is climate change. You see the distribution of votes here. Number 1 at the moment is climate change. Maybe a few more votes. Number 2 and number 3 are technological change and inequality. Number 4 and 5 are both population aging, population aging, then urbanization, and then deglobalization. Okay. So, but all of them are above 2.5, above the midpoints. It's a range of 1 to 5. So climate change is your number 1 challenge. Okay. So that's the view of the group. There's a variety of perspectives. So if you look at the distribution, it's very skewed to the right of climate change. So, okay, so let's look at, so bear that in mind. It's a little bit of open, so technological change is now going to number 2, but climate change is your main challenge. Let's think about these challenges in turn. I'll ask you another question later on mentally. So, let's look at these six challenges in turn and make some observations. First of all, population change. The 20th century was the century of population growth. The 21st century will be largely the century of population aging. Yes, the world is carrying on getting bigger, but it's getting bigger at a slower rate. Okay. There are some differences between some regions. Africa is growing fast in terms of the number of people, whereas many other parts of the world are growing in terms of aging. So it shows world population. The actual number of people is shown in the green. So you see the rapid increase in the number of people in the 20th century, particularly in the latter half of the 20th century. And the actual growth rate is shown in the purple bar, the purple line. So you see the rapid growth rate, particularly in the 20th century. And then the growth rate has been declining somewhat, but it's still positive. So the world's getting bigger, but it's getting bigger at a slower rate. Okay, so you see a massive increase. And there are some differences across countries, of course. You see the UK is at the bottom here, just to give you a benchmark. Then you have the US in purple, and then you have India and China farther up. So China in the reddish line, and India in the green line. These are the median forecast for the United Nations. And you see this crossover point now. Basically that point where India is now getting bigger in terms of the number of people than China. And actually China's population is on decline, and India's will be on the decline in about 20 years or so. Now, so the world is getting bigger, but increasingly the world is getting older. This is life expectancy in 1800. Now, just for those of you at the back, most of the world here is red, and red would mean that you would live on average to around about your late 30s or 40s. Okay, so I would have left this mortal coil a long time ago, probably, if I'd been born in 1800. So we see these big, very young, low life expectancy for most parts of the world where we've got data. Now let's fast forward to 1950. Okay, the world economic growth increased significantly in 1950, but often dominated by Europe and North America. So Europe and North America, that average life expectancy is into the 70s. But you still see much of the world is red, particularly in parts of Asia and much of Africa. So again, the growth hadn't really filtered into those parts of the world. So Asia and Africa still is in the late 30s, 40s as the average life expectancy. Now let's fast forward to 2011. Okay, now if you look at Europe, here, look at Europe and North America's dark green. So we're living now into our late 70s or possibly our 80s, and much of the rest of the world has improved significantly. There are still big issues about Africa. Africa still, average life expectancy is much lower in much of Africa than it is in Europe and North America, although it has increased over time. Now, living longer life, particularly if you're living a better life, I think it's good. I do vote for it. And much of this is a product of prosperity and economic growth. We have better jobs in most parts of the world, not all, safer jobs. We have better healthcare, we have better food, better sustenance, better more help and assistance in later life. But it does have some economic implications, not only for economies, but also for companies. This is the dependency ratio by region, actual and forecast. Now let me explain what the dependency ratio is. The dependency ratio, if you think about it, if you think about the population, you have some people who are working. Now, the working age group here is specifically 50 to 64, but it varies from country to country. So there are people who work, and there are people who depend on people who work. And the dependents are young people and old people who've retired. Okay, so, and the dependency ratio is the ratio of the number of dependents, young people and old people, expressed as the ratio of the number of workers. The workers here are aged between 50 and 64. So what we see is these dependency ratios going down at the end of the 19th century, and then forecast to go up in the 20th century, and forecast to go up in the 21st century, with the exception of Africa, because Africa's got a very fast-growing population. So the dependency ratios are going up. So that means there are more dependents, more young people, or old people, in this particular case old people, compared to what we were historically. So there are more dependents in relation to the number of workers, particularly because people are living longer. So those dependents depend on you either directly through the family looks after them, you look after the children, you look after the older people, or indirectly through the state, through the tax system. So the state taxes people who are working and gives some of that money to pay for education or childcare, or to pay for health and pensions for those people who are older. Now, if you've got rising dependency ratios, that creates certain challenges for economies, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So we've got an aging population, and that means rising dependency ratios. We have more older people living in many parts of the world. Now, as people live older, this is directly related to economic prosperity. So what we have here is on the horizontal axis, you have GDP per capita measured in purchasing power parity in dollars. So it's a pretty standard measure. So you've got GDP on the horizontal axis, and on the vertical axis you've got life expectancy. So you see it's not a perfect fit, but actually in general, as countries become richer, people live longer. Okay, they have better healthcare, better food, better nutrition, often safer, better jobs, higher pensions, and so on. So prosperity generates more life expectancy, but life expectancy as you get older means you have to spend more on healthcare. So here we have life expectancy on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis you have health spending per capita. So in general, as people live longer, the country has to spend more on healthcare, either through the state or through the market, through the insurance system, or directly. So world health spending is definitely correlated with it. It's for most of you won't be consuming much healthcare. As people get older, they consume much more healthcare. It's very much skewed by age. Okay, as you get older, you consume more healthcare. So again, it's not a perfect fit, but the country with the highest level of healthcare spending per capita is the USA. If it was on the line of best fit, that blank line, the average American would be living around about another 5 to 6 years compared to what they do. Okay, so it's very a lot of money spent in the USA on healthcare, but it's very below the line of best fit. What does this tell us about future growth and future prosperity? Countries will spend a lot more on healthcare. If you think about it, as your income goes up, what do you want to spend that extra income on? Well, yeah, you might want a new iPad or a new iPhone. But actually, a lot of people want to have an extra, better year of quality life. Okay, it's pretty standard. As income goes up, people spend more on education and spend more on healthcare. And we'll see, if we do have a return to some sort of normal growth path, what will healthcare spending look like in 2040? Put it in this context, look at the bottom bar. This is according to the King's Fund, which is a health research group based in London. Basically, depending on various scenarios, in the United States, healthcare will be a quarter of the economy in 2040. About a quarter of the economy will be healthcare related. Because people are living longer and want to live hopefully better quality lives. So, population growth, and particularly population aging, has many implications. First of all, who will generate wealth? So you're getting a smaller number of people who are actually in the working age groups, people living longer. Who will generate the wealth? Anybody here got any solutions to the issue of population aging, say in the UK? What should we do about it? Population aging in the UK. What policies would you recommend to government? Anybody? Yeah, you're doing a grand job here. Someone get your microphone. Population aging in the UK. What are you going to do about it? There you go. Okay, supply side policies. What's supply side policies? Okay, so how are you going to increase the productive capacity of the economy? Okay, immigration. That's a great one. Okay, great idea. If you've got aging population, you want more people to come in to supply your workforce, basically, so you want to get more people coming in. So immigration is a suggestion for that. It's a great idea. We've got a few more over here. I'm coming around with this microphone. Speak loudly into it. Okay, increase the retirement age. Actually, the UK has got rid of the retirement age in the UK. It used to be a compulsory retirement age. And now your employer can't force you to retire. There's only 3 institutions where they force people to retire. I'll be with you in a minute. And that is St Andrews University, Oxford University, and Cambridge University. So when you come here, there'll be no fuddy-duddies like me teaching you, because we've all been sacked basically by the university, because they all force us to retire at 67. It's against UK government policy, but all the academics are forced to retire. The non-academic staff are not forced to retire, but they get rid of the academics. So when you come here, lots of young, bright people will be teaching you. So great. Retirement age is another one, yeah?
Okay, so say how about one?
You carry on, I'll repeat it.
Right, say how about money, like you're earning money. Most people use their work to retire, to pay off their mortgage, right? Put that money, you have this property, and then you realise that you don't.
Okay, so you're encouraging people to save, are you, for their retirement? They're saving for their retirement, okay. Okay, there's a recommendation for you. No holidays, no new cars, okay. You've got to save for your retirement because you're going to live a very long life. So that's but we tend to be a bit myopic in our behaviour. Sorry, one more. Okay. So I'm not sure. So that was reduce the income tax, which will then have a multiplier effect on the economy. So I'm not. Are you just back? Was that Trussonomics or was that Keynesian economics? I'm not quite certain. Was it Trussonomics? You know, the idea that the Trussonomics argument, you decrease taxes and that affects the supply side. Or Keynesian economics, you decrease taxes and it affects the demand side. So was it Trussonomics or Keynesian economics you're arguing? Keynesian, yeah, fair enough. Does anybody know where Keynes studied? Cambridge, yeah, so we're all Keynesians here, so well, we used to be anyway. So a number of good arguments. people, nobody said immigration, very good argument. Raising the retirement age. Raising the retirement age. Of course, nobody suggested lowering the school leaving age. So that's perhaps not a good idea, but it would create more workers. But you know, these are our challenges. Can we get more workers in? What do we do about retirement? How do we generate productivity growth? So the need for productivity growth is important, because if you have productivity growth, your wages go up, but also taxes go up. Tax take goes up, and that may help to pay for people in older age to the pensions and social care. And of course, we've got to bear in mind how do we pay for the increasing costs of healthcare and social care. These will be challenges for many countries. What do you do about old people? Okay, do they work? How much they consume for their healthcare? How do they pay for their healthcare? And also the big issue about social care, which is actually completely ignored by many governments in the UK for too long a period. Okay. Time. Well, let's think about some of the challenges. The fact that we're all living, well, many of us now are living in cities. Urbanisation has both been a cause and a consequence of economic growth. If you think about it, we had manufacturing before the Industrial Revolution. We did make stuff, but we made stuff often in the farm or in the agricultural sector. With the Industrial Revolution, we had the development of technologies, but also the development of the factory system. The factory system, as you know, led to the division of labour, allowed you to have economies of scale, but with a factory system, you needed workers nearby. So that led to the acceleration of the growth of cities. Cities existed before as marketplaces or political centres. With the Industrial Revolution, they became economic centres. And these arguably were not particularly nice places to live in. Okay, so you will study the Industrial Revolution if you come here. We do economic history, which is in the economics faculty, I may add. And the whole issue about whether the Industrial Revolution led to an improvement in the standard of living is much debated. And one of the arguments is these urban areas were very bad environments for workers to live in. These are often called the dark satanic mills. The mills were not nice places to work in, and the urban areas were not nice places to work in. So urbanisation went along with economic growth as both a cause and a consequence of economic growth. Now if you take the global picture, take a step back, more people now are living in urban areas rather than rural areas. So the blue line here are people living in urban areas, and the green line is rural areas. So we've got this shift. More people living in urban areas. Particularly what's driving this, or has driven this over the past 30 to 40 years, has been a rapid growth of cities in China. I mean, if you go, we take our students in the business school, we take our students to do trips abroad, or we have them both pre and now post-COVID, and we used to go to China. And I remember visiting Shenzhen. I don't know if any of you have ever visited Shenzhen. We visited Shenzhen, which is a major urban area and a major innovation hub in China. And when we were visiting that, we were told it was a fishing village 25 years ago. And it's now a major urban area. The rapid growth of change in China is substantial. Much more rapid than we see here. I mean, 25 years ago, Shenzhen was a fishing village, now it's a big urban area. It's effectively a megacity. Well, 25 years ago, we were still debating whether to have another runway at Heathrow. And we still haven't had one, whether you think it's good or bad. Things move much slower here than they do in countries such as China. So you have this rural-urban shift, and many of the biggest cities in the world now will either be in Africa or Asia. This picks up a point I'm going to mention right at the end, the shift. We're seeing a shift in globalization. A shift from the West, reorientation from the West to the East. We're seeing that in corporate affairs, economic affairs, and even urban areas. Big growth of cities. This creates many challenges and opportunities for business. Because you want to make your cities smart and efficient. You also want to make them good places to live in. Okay? The economic geographers want to have a city with buzz. You want to have a place that is exciting to live in, a place that has buzz. But in terms of efficiency and being sustainable, these are the big issues. Can you get water into cities? We take it for granted in the UK, but water is a big challenge in many cities. Getting energy Stable energy supplies, again, a big challenge in the cities. Making cities safe, security is a big challenge. Getting rid of waste, making them green and sustainable is a big challenge in many cities. And the top, moving people around cities in a sustainable way is a challenge. The above ground speed in London, it's been argued, is no quicker now than it was in the middle of the 19th century, before the invention of the internal combustion engine. It's a congested city, it's very slow to move people around. So making cities efficient, making cities sustainable is an important issue for both politicians at the local level, politicians at the national level, but also for many corporates moving into this space. So Philips in Eindhoven is really focusing on increasingly providing resources, providing inputs into making cities more sustainable. A few more challenges to think of. Your number one, unless it's changed, I think it hasn't. Your number one challenge, and I think I would agree with you, is climate change. This was the one that highest scored in the mentioning of. Climate change is a major challenge. If you think about it, it all links to economic growth. Economic growth requires energy. Okay, so this is global energy use actual and projected by the OECD. Why is it going up? Because we need more energy to sustain economic growth. And to the extent that we use fossil fuels and other similar sources, that generates emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, and of course other emissions. So growth requires energy, of course, use of energy, particularly carbon fossil fuels, is causing problems for the environment in terms of emissions. Now, there are some people who say, well, this tells us that we need to have slower growth, and you may argue that's fine. And somebody said the slower growth must come in those countries that are having rapid growth at the moment, rapid growth over the last 20 or 30 years, particularly countries such as China and India, which are in the blue bar here. I think it's a very dangerous policy to say that other countries with lower levels of prosperity cannot follow the same routes as the so-called richer countries in Europe and North America. I think it's effectively what Han Chang, who used to be in this faculty, was called pulling up the ladder. It's rich countries saying to poorer countries, you cannot follow the route that we took because your growth is damaging the environment. I think what we need to do is have a much more global approach to dealing with these challenges, rather than say to countries such as India and China, you need slower growth because you're damaging the world's environment. And there are some lessons we can learn from even UK history. It is true, if you go to countries such as China, this is Beijing, you will often find the climate it's very unpleasant, the environment and the climate when you go there. Now this is China today, in many major cities such as Beijing, where this was taken. But we only have to go back to the 50s and 60s to see what London looked like. Not massively dissimilar, London in the 50s and 60s. This was the so-called smog. We had smoke that was burned in houses or in factories, combining with fog, it creates this ugly thing called smog, which is very damaging to people's health and damaging to the climate. Now, it's not brilliant in London now, those of you from London will know, but it's not like that. And the reason it's not like that is two main things. First of all, policy. Governments said to households and factories, you cannot burn coal. So policy stopped the burning of coal in factories and in houses. Also, economic change. There's very little manufacturing in London now. And to put it bluntly, if you're working in financial services, you're working in a bank or a management consultant or whatever, you damage the environment less than if you're working in a steel factory. So policy and economic change has improved the environment. It does tell us that economic change, but also policy, and particularly policy at the global level, may be an important challenge, rather than identifying individual countries. So I would stress the importance of green technology and also the importance of global cooperation. We need global cooperation, we need better technologies, and we need those incentive systems to be created by the policymakers. The European Union is doing this, has a big initiative on circular economies, making their economy circular and not wasting resources, and focusing much more on the environment. Now, a few more challenges to think of. Everybody okay? We've got about another 20 minutes or so before you get your well-earned break. Nobody flagging. Good. Okay. A few more challenges. Technology. The rise of the machines. Are we all going to lose our jobs to technology? We're either going to lose it to robotics, or we're going to lose it to artificial intelligence. Anybody here use ChatGPT to do an assignment? Yeah? Did you? What mark did you get? You got 100%. Well done. Well done. Dreadful. I've discouraged that completely on the record. Do not use ChatGPT when you go to Cambridge, unless you're allowed to use it. What subject is it for? History. Nobody gets 100% in history, so you're making it up. Okay. Oh, shh. 20 minutes from now, the discussion is about it. Okay, are we all going to lose our jobs to the machines? So the machines will replace us. Now, if we think about it, if you think what's going on here, if machines can be expensive to produce, expensive to buy, but if you have, this is Boston Dynamics, interesting story about technology. Technology and innovation is my research area. Boston Dynamics was a spin-out from MIT in Boston, and initial research was all funded by the US government, particularly the US military. A lot of innovation comes from that. So these robots were initially designed for military use. But if you think about it, if you have a robot to do the job, you don't have to pay the robot a wage. You can keep the robot going 24 hours a day, apart from some maintenance time, and you can treat the robot badly. Okay? So you can figure out why you might want to replace workers with robots, because then all of the product, all the value added from the robot goes to the owner of the robot. Because that robot is not earning a wage; it just has to be maintained and whatever. So you can get the robot to do all the jobs you want it to do. And of course, also you can treat robots badly. If you treat workers badly, what will they do? They will go on strike, or they will ask for better terms and conditions. But if you treat the robot badly, it will just carry on working. The robot's not going to say, right, I'm going to go on strike. Now, why you would want to do that, I don't know, because that's just wasting your time. But of course, this all assumes that the robots are working and the technology works. So perhaps if the technology doesn't work, okay, that's not a good robot. Okay. That robot is kind of, if you come to Cambridge, that robot probably went to a 4 more than like before. It probably was being a little bit rushed. Okay, so will we lose our jobs to the robots? Will they replace our jobs? And what will we do for people who lose their jobs? Perhaps we can learn something from history. I did teach economic history when I was in this faculty many years ago, in this room. Here's world GDP from 1000 to 2000. Great economic historian Angus Madison has done this data. This is world GDP per capita. Hardly moved at all until the end of the 18th century. And then it's like a hockey stick, goes up. What happened at the end of the 18th century? Somebody shout it out. Industrial Revolution, yes, well done. But where did it happen? Where did the Industrial Revolution start? Country, not actual, town. It's in the UK, okay? So the Industrial Revolution started in the UK. Lots of economic stories we work on why did the Industrial Revolution happen here, what the implications of it are. Some people argued we got first mover disadvantage, and part of the problems we have today is we were the first industrial nation. This tells us that basically technology and innovation can promote growth and prosperity. Okay, so that's what before the Industrial Revolution, world GDP per person was relatively flat. Then it took off in the UK, and in Europe, and in North America, and then spread elsewhere in terms of economic growth and prosperity. And it tells us something about what drives economic growth. What drives economic growth is innovation. This is what's steam engine, which is one of the wave of gadgets that increase economic growth and prosperity. And of course, business model innovation I mentioned earlier. The factory system was what we call a business model innovation. How you organise businesses are different. So the factory system was also part of the story. It was a new innovation. So innovations drive growth, but can be very, very disruptive. If you think about the impact on jobs, we have innovation and technological change. So replace labour with machines, or replace it with robots, and that means job losses. But at the same time, it generates income growth, particularly the people who own the machines. And what do those people who own the machines do? They spend that money, and that creates new jobs. So both technology both destroys jobs and creates jobs. Now, of course, often the big challenge is the people who lose their jobs aren't people who gain their jobs. So it's disruptive for people and disruptive for places, as we've seen since the Industrial Revolution in the UK. So if we look at who's going to lose their jobs, this is some work done by PwC. Will robots steal our jobs? So you see the ones at the top, depends on the level of sophistication, that's why we've got different colour bars. So you see transportation, manufacturing, and construction are at the top. Luckily for me, education is at the bottom. Okay, so by the time the university sacks me, you know, I'll still be in a job because the technology will not replace me, hopefully. Crucial thing, well, how does it affect by sex, by age, and by education level? A little bit of variation because of different jobs that people do. The big one I was just to focus on is the one at the bottom, education level. The people most likely to lose their jobs with the so-called low education level according to PwC. The ones that are already protected, people like yourselves with a higher education level. You're likely less likely to lose your jobs. So that's the impact it has on sectors and people. What's the impact on countries? Again, the argument, it replaces labour with machines. Job losses in countries with a comparative advantage in low-cost labour. So they'll lose their jobs because the jobs will now go to be done by machines. And actually job gains in countries with a comparative advantage in technology, where the robots are located. So if you depend on low-cost labour, you lose your jobs. If you have technology and robots, you gain in terms of jobs. We still gain in terms of output and also gain small gain in terms of jobs. Now, this is some work done by City GPS with some colleagues at Oxford. And all countries will gain somewhat, and all countries will lose somewhat. But they sort of rank them. So the top row are the countries that they think will gain. North America and Europe particularly, because that's where the robots will be, they thought. And the countries that will lose, they said, are China and the ASEAN countries, the group of ASEAN countries in Asia, because they think that's where the low-cost labour is. Now, I have to say, I think that's wrong. Okay, so I'm just telling you, I am showing you something. You can say it's right, that's fine, disagreement is our fuel, but I think it's wrong. This is worldwide supply of industrial robots. So certainly, robots, as well as AI, is increasing rapidly. But there's the argument that it's going to really have a harmful effect on growth in China and the ASEAN countries, but benefit Europe and North America. Well, that assumes a very static notion of comparative advantage, which those of you who may have studied the concept. But it assumes that China is competing on low-cost labour, and that's its main comparative advantage. China is rapidly changing its comparative advantage. This is China 2025 policy, where it says it's investing in technologies, including automotive, aerospace, semiconductors, IT, and robotics. Look at that chart again I just showed you. 20% of the world's robots are in China. 1/3 of every new robot is in China. Let's not just assume China is competing on low-cost labour. Some of the best universities in the world are in Europe and North America, and increasingly many of the best universities in the world are in China. Some of the best science is done in China. Let's not assume that China is just based on a high population and low-cost labour. It's not. Now, a couple more challenges to think of before you get your well-earned impact on lunch. So important implications here: which jobs will be replaced? Where will the new jobs be created? It's easier to understand the jobs that are going to be destroyed than the jobs that are going to be created. Okay, I've been in Cambridge too long, but the sorts of jobs that are done in Cambridge didn't exist 40 years ago or so when I first came. So there's many new jobs that you wouldn't have expected. And of course, who owns the machines, and what will the impact of who owns and who manages the machines? That will be crucial, because the income will go to machine owners. And it may have an impact on inequality, which is my next challenge. This is one picture of inequality. This is Paradise City, Sao Paulo, Brazil. Now, in many urban areas, many urban areas, big cities, you see poor people living very close to prosperous or rich people. Why? Why do you often see this in many big cities, mega cities? Why do you have an impoverished place often living very close to big places, next to people of prosperity? Anybody? Anybody got any idea? Why do you find often see these locations very close together? You're doing a hard lifting here, but I'll let you do it again. Go on. You definitely, if I was giving prizes out, I'd definitely give you one. I'm an economist, so I don't give anything away. Why do you see that? There's not enough space. Well, actually, there is quite a lot of space. Let me give you a clue. What sort of jobs do you think people do on the left-hand side of that photograph? Yeah, they work for the people on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side, you see the more prosperous space. Often you find these in many parts of the world. You'll see that people who live close to where they work, and they work here. They may do the gardening, they may look after the cleaning, they may look after childcare, and so on. You see that in many cities. I should stress here that Paradise City is just the left-hand side of the photograph. Okay, so the people living over here are living in Paradise City. So they may be impoverished, but at least they maintain, I think, a sense of humour given the difficult conditions they often live in. Now that's a geographical focus you see in many urban areas, but let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. I'm not going to look at all the measures of inequality, just income inequality. I know that there are wealth inequality and other forms of inequality. This is the Gini coefficient. You'll know that the red is a high Gini coefficient, high level of inequality. Green is a low level of inequality. So you see it's low, particularly in the Nordic countries. It's low inequality. Much higher in southern parts of Africa and also higher in many parts of southern America. So it does vary. Remember, this is inequality, it's not prosperity. Rich countries could be unequal or equal. Okay? And poor countries could be unequal or equal. This is inequality. Now let's see what's been changing over time. This is a very famous diagram. It's sometimes called an elephant diagram. It looks like an elephant. This is growth of income by income percentile from the period of rapid globalization from 1800 to 2016. Who's gained arguably during this period? Who's gained from globalization? Over here, the rise of the emerging economies. Many people working in India, China, and other countries. Rapid growth. Then over here, the top 1% in Europe and North America we all hear about. Who's been squeezed? The middle has been squeezed. These are low and medium skilled workers in Europe and North America. So these are the ones who are squeezed. These are arguably the people who said, hold on, globalization is not benefiting me. Arguably, these might be the people who voted for President Trump, or maybe they may vote for Brexit. They said, hold on, this global economic economy growth is not benefiting me. Now, let's also just look at a couple of differences across countries. This is the US, a liberal market economy, the home of free enterprise. This is the top 1% in red and the bottom 50% in blue. And you see this crossover. Top 1% going up from 1980 to 2016, and the bottom 50% going down as a share of national income. This is the squeeze group. Wages for many workers in the US have hardly grown at all over the past 20, 30 years. Now, of course, that's the US. You get a different picture if you look at Europe. This is Western Europe. Okay, now the bottom 50% is again in blue, and the top 1% in red. Yes, the 1% is going up, but the bottom 50% has been going down, but they haven't crossed over. We have a different form of capitalism in many European countries. There's more state intervention, more government intervention, higher taxes, but also higher benefits and so on, and perhaps a stronger welfare state. One other aspect to look at, Gender inequality. This is female labour income shares across the world. We have a whole series of countries here: Asia, China, Russia, Middle East, North Africa, North America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Western Europe. None, no country has parity. No region has parity. Okay, these are times from 1990 to 2010. That's from the World Inequality Report. And most of them are going up a little bit, but they're not nowhere near parity, with the exception of China. China's actually going down in terms of gender parity. So we do have unequal income in terms of gender, as we do in other measures such as race as well. Now, I'm going to ask you a question in a minute, so prepare to go on your phones. Implications of inequality. How do we deal with it? Equality of opportunity, equality of outcome. The need for technological change and the impact of technological change. Will technological change make things worse? Hold on, if you own these machines, you get all of the income from the machines. If you're a low-skilled worker, you lose your jobs to the machines. Will it make inequality worse? Is there an argument for redistribution? Now, here's a question. This is meant to be a question. So, on your phones or your computers or whatever. Is income inequality a major problem that requires government intervention? Now, there are competing views. Some people say, actually, income inequality is a product of successful capitalism. You need incentive systems that people work hard, an entrepreneur, get their rewards. Others argue that income inequality has gone too far, markets don't always work efficiently and causing social tensions and so on. So, let me ask you that question. Here we go. To what extent do you agree with the following? Income inequality, so it's income inequality, we can look at other ones, but we've only got time for one. Income inequality is a major problem that requires government intervention. Now, you can strongly agree on one side, or you go on the other side to strongly disagree, or somewhere in between. As you know, this is a Likert scale. You need an odd number, so everybody can be at the midpoint if they require. So it's a 5-point Likert scale. You can strongly agree, moderately agree, either agree or disagree, moderately disagree, or strongly disagree. We've done a few 10 minutes, so we've done getting lunch. Okay, let's carry on voting if you haven't voted. Okay, that's very interesting. So there is it's not a normal distribution, as you can see it's skewed to the left. So strongly agree is 41, 95 moderately agree, 15 don't know, or in the middle, and then 21 moderately disagree, and 3 strongly disagree. So who strongly agreed or moderately agreed? Just tell us why. Just tell us if you were either blue or yellow. Just put your hand up, just tell us why. There's no right or wrong answer, people have different views about this. Yeah, but one at the back, we're just going to get a microphone to you. Just tell us which way you voted and why, that's all. The gentleman with the grey jumper on. Yeah.
So I did moderately agree because I think you need to protect the, obviously you need to decrease inequality as much as possible. But I feel like too much, it almost feels too much protectionism will like weigh on the economy essentially, and it's not obviously efficient. So there needs to be an element of efficiency as well.
Okay. So if you protect people that have a great inefficiency, is that a concern?
If you go too far, I feel like, because you're just wasting resources at that point.
Okay, and the difficult question, what policy would you implement? You've got the principle, but what's the policy?
Policy?
Tax changes, or?
I think you should probably try to go for more supply side policies like increasing education, or increasing the quality of it, so less people are actually in those positions of low, jobs that are likely to be taken over by capital in the future.
Okay, so great. Supply side policies, education. Great, thank you for that. Any other people on that side? Yeah, over here. See if this one works. Excuse me, I can't move that quickly. Here we go. Gentleman with a black hoodie, I think.
Alright, so I think I put strongly agree.
Okay.
Because I think that how civilized an economy is can be based on how they treat the vulnerable people in their economy.
Right,
yeah. If the income distribution is high and people are struggling with living standards because of the income inequality, then I think there needs to be government intervention in order to solve that.
What would the government intervention be?
I think that they should increase income tax for the top bracket and also put a wealth tax on people with a wealth over 5 million.
Okay, wealth tax. Okay, brilliant. Okay. If I could have a little bit of AV support, would be great, actually. That's good. Okay. Great, so wealth tax, brilliant. Anybody on the other side who vote the other way?
Is it all good if he's standing up?
We've heard some very articulate views for strongly agree or moderately agree. What about the people on the other side, moderately disagree or strongly disagree? Just tell us why. Remember, we're in a university, disagreement is fine. Actually, disagreement is great. So if you were purple or pink, just tell us why. Is it gentleman over here who got 100% for his GPT?
Of course. I was going to say, I moderately disagree because most of the time when governments intervene, they don't have proper sort of follow-ups to kind of make sure that everything's in check. So if they're going to do regulation or tax or something like that, they kind of have to make sure that they go through with the entire thing, otherwise it's just pointless. So yeah, that's kind of
So it's an inefficient government argument, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So governments make things worse ultimately because they're not very efficient. Okay, great, thank you. One more observation from another pink or purple person? You are a few in the room. There's one over here. Yes, there's a gentleman over here. Just tell us which way you voted and why. And then we'll just wrap up for another 5 minutes or so, and then we'll finish.
I voted strongly agree, but when you said the wealth tax, I don't really agree with that because that would decrease the incentive of the rich people to actually set up businesses and increase innovation in the economy.
Okay, so wealth tax wouldn't work because of disincentive effects. Okay, competing arguments. Okay, there are difficult challenges, and you've outlined them. We've got some policies, but will those policies have negative effects? Will they have effect on economic growth? Will they have effect on prosperity? Will governments be inefficient? But it is a major challenge, I think, and it is interesting to me. Thank you for voting. It's interesting. There was a spectrum of opinion, but you were skewed on the left-hand side of that answer. Now, let's think about my last challenge, and then make a few final comments, and then you can have your well-earned break. The last challenge is, are we living in a period of deglobalization? We've had a rapid period of globalization, arguably from the past couple of hundred years, but are we going to a period of deglobalization? Trade wars and other factors, not only China and the United States, but affecting other countries. According to The Economist, as I mentioned, we may be in a period of goodbye globalization as countries become more inward-looking. Of course, you mentioned this in the previous talk, the issue about sanctions. Sanctions are again another form, arguably, of reducing globalization. And of course, from the UK side, we've got the challenges of Brexit now. I'm not going to ask you a question about Brexit, but those who argue for Brexit say it's all about global Britain, Britain becoming more globalized. Those who think about Brexit being having an adverse effect actually say that's actually Britain becoming more inward-looking and less integrated in Europe and in other countries. And of course, what we do know is that it really did divide the country. Divided the country geographically, divided the country by age. In general, younger people voted to remain, older people voted to come out. And it had big geographical differences. I have to tell you, one of the cities in the UK that had the highest vote to remain in the European Union was Cambridge. And that's not a surprise, because this university got more money from the EU than any other university in the world. Okay, so, economic terms, incentives, we wanted to say, we don't get all that research money. But it really did divide the country. Major implications of this, a trade war, and perhaps if you do have a trade war, a continuation of a trade war, it really harms people, but particularly harms the poor, because they're paying higher wages, higher incomes, higher prices for the goods and services they produce. Right, last few observations. I've looked at the global challenges, talked about the way the world may be becoming less globalised, and we've got different views about how important these challenges are. One other factor I want to mention is, and I've alluded to this, but I mentioned is that we're also seeing a reorientation of the global economy. We're seeing a shift. Arguably, the 19th century was often called the century dominated by the UK, British imperial century. Again, empire and other issues, very important issues to discuss if we have time. Arguably, the 20th century was the American century, particularly after the Second World War. Many others will argue that actually the 21st century will become the Chinese century. And for many, this is just a long-term reorientation of going back to normal. This is the world's centre of gravity. I showed you some data before, done by Angus Madison. This is based on Angus Madison's data. It's looking at the world's centre of gravity. It was in the East before the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution dragged it towards Europe. The growth of North America dragged it across the Atlantic. But it's been going back since the second half of the 20th century, back towards the East. So perhaps having a reorientation of West to East. Now, if we look at the data, if there's a return to normal, what will the world look like in 2050? China will remain the biggest economy. Now, some of you would say, well, China's not the biggest economy now. But it's not the biggest economy if you measure it in market prices. But if you measure it in purchasing power parity, China is the biggest economy. It's been the biggest economy for some time. I think purchasing power parity is the best way of measuring it. If you don't know what purchasing power parity is, just Google Big Mac later, the Big Mac Index, and you can see what purchasing power parity means. But in purchasing power parity terms, China is the biggest economy. It will remain the biggest economy. By 2050, China and India will be much bigger than the G7 that dominate the world political economy at the moment. This is in terms of GDP in PPP measures. It's not in terms of average GDP. Average prosperity will remain highest in Europe. But in terms of total economic activity, it will be dominated by China and India. So this is data done by PwC. If you look, in 2050, the top two countries are China and India. China's number one already at the moment, the US number two. In 2050, it's China and India. To just give you, for those at the back, which is all of you, just give you some sort of sense of what's going on. Here's the biggest four countries now in economic terms. In 2022, number 4 is Japan, 3 is India, 2 is the United States, and number 1 in PPP terms is China. Now, if we fast forward to 2050, and if there is a return to normal growth patterns that we expect, who's the top 4 then? Number 4 is Indonesia. Number 3 is the United States. It's bigger, but its ranking has changed. Number 2 is India, and China remains number 1, with a much bigger economy. Now, this is in terms of total GDP of the economy. If you look at GDP per person, which is our standard measure of prosperity, China and India won't catch up with Europe and North America by 2050. It's going to take much longer. So, this is GDP per person in PPP terms. The light pink is 2016, the dark red is 2050. So you see there's big growth in India, Indonesia, China, Brazil, and so on. Big growth in GDP per person, but it doesn't catch up by 2050 with the US, or UK, or Germany, and so on. In terms of total GDP, it's India and China will be the biggest. In GDP per capita, it's still the countries, primarily Europe, North America, Australia, Japan, and so on. Now, let me wrap up. So, what I'm arguing here is we're seeing a shift from west to east. Now, the problem is when you see these shifts, you often have a period of instability. So, the period dominated by Britain largely ended towards the beginning of the 20th century. There was a period of instability in the 20s and 30s, trade wars, and of course, also the economic foundations of World War II. Major period of instability. We may be in a period of instability now, where I started from, reflecting the fact that some of these shifting tectonic plates haven't actually fully materialized yet. We're seeing a shift from west to east. We're interregning a period of instability. So, to wrap up, we're in a period of uncertainty and instability, perhaps reflecting these long-term shifts. There are major challenges. I've identified 6. They may not be the only 6 challenges, but climate change was the number 1 of this group, and I think I agree with you. The balance of economic activity is shifting from west to east, particularly with the growth of China and India. And we may see major long-term shifts following COVID-19. There may be changing shifts following COVID-19 and the geopolitical tensions that exist at the moment. These create opportunities and challenges for economies and for society. The global economy may be living in a period of uncertainty. Globalization itself may be under threat. And I'm going to end with a quote. This is a quote about globalization. I'll just read this out and we'll finish. All old established national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all nations. By industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones. Industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old wants satisfied by the production of the country, we find new wants required for their satisfaction with product distant lands. We have universal interdependence of nations, as in material, so also in intellectual production. That's a great summary, I think, of globalization. It's my favourite globalization quote. Very last question, not meant to be a question. Who said that? John Maynard Keynes? Is somebody over here? John Maynard. Wasn't John Maynard Keynes? Good guess, but wrong. This is the only question that's right or wrong today. Somebody actually wrote this. Who's the author of this? Or the authors, actually? Give me a clue. Who's the authors of this? I would hear that voice somewhere. I hear the name somewhere. Shout it. Stand up and shout it out. Karl Marx. Brilliantly. Brilliant. Well done. But you're only 50% correct. Unlike your colleague who's 100% correct. Now, if you put this in the ChatGPT, it's surely told it's Marx and Engels. Okay? This is from the Communist Manifesto. The important point here is not who wrote it when it was written. It was written in 1848. So let's not, we're in a period of uncertainty, we're in a period of instability for the global economy. But let's not think this is necessarily unique. Globalization is a long history, and economies and societies evolved, and people integrated or less integrated in the global economy over a long period of time. Let's not necessarily think these challenges are all unique now. They have a long period of development and a long period of growth. Thank you very much indeed. Have a lovely rest of the day.